Martin, I just wanted to
Always.
ask some question that would likely be frequently asked. What was the inspiration behind Crawlee?
Well, like the initial inspiration, that's a good question. Probably not so much for me. Like I joined Apify 1.5 years ago. And by the time there was this Apify SDK, I will quickly talk about it in a few minutes. And that was like the initial implementation of what I saw first. And like, you know, if you ask this question, it would be better to ask the founders, because like the foundation for Apify SDK, which in turn became Crawlee, that was like, what, 5 years ago, maybe. And I guess by the time it was simple, you wanted to gather data, and it wasn't that easy 5 years ago. Like right now, we have multiple tools for automation, and many things are like low code or no code platforms. But by the time, it was mainly like hack your own solution. And yeah, if I'm not mistaken, like the whole idea was born as a web application. So we basically were able to build simple scrapers just by filling some text inputs and text form. And well, maybe I see we have Lukáš, so maybe we could even ask him, because he's definitely longer in the company than I am. So what was the initial state years ago?
Give me a second.
Okay. Anyway, for me, if you ask me, then for me, the motivation was to make something better than what I see. I am like deeply interested in developer experience and TypeScript in general. And I came to a project that was like big, nice, but not up to date, let's say. And this was like, for me, the inception of Crawlee, to turn it into something modern and extensible and easy to use, hopefully. Yeah, and maybe just let's fill in the silence. This was like the moment when I was the first time in the company. The interview for me basically was about the Apify SDK, and basically 2-hour discussion about how to make it better. And Crawlee is kind of the newborn that came from this discussion. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, when I joined Apify about like 5 years ago, it was a web application, as you said. Basically, it was a similar system where you paste a function that's run on every page, but a lot of the logic was baked into the web application. So we had issues with flexibility, and I think it's a similar issue that you would have on many of current scraping platforms, especially those that work with like UI configuration, where you just can do only the stuff that the application allows you. So basically, there were 2 options that our founders were kind of discussing where we could go. Either we just add more and more options into the web application, like send me an email, integrate with this service, add more input option, output options as well. And they decided for a more risky approach, but I think in the long term, we are very happy that we went that way, to just like throw it all away and start with just a simple Docker container and Node.js runtime, and build it as a library, not as an application. And this allowed us to basically do anything with that crawler. We then kind of refilled all the previous logic, which became the Apify SDK. That's the like request queue data sets, all the kind of crawling and enqueuing logic, and we bound it to the Apify platform features, like the storage, the proxy, and so on. This took a few years to kind of arrive at the right final format, and I think Crawlee is just the next level of making the library independent of the Apify brand, and making it stand on itself, so you don't really need to know anything about Apify right now, and you can just use this similar way, like Scrape is a popular library for Python, where you don't need to know about the company that kind of bootstrapped it. It's living on its own.
Yeah, it's funny that like we got this question, like whether we will turn this project into a company, and like we pretty much did the opposite direction, right? We built a company and then started producing the open source tooling so others can use the product that we are selling. So yeah. Okay, I guess we can slowly start. So, right, Matt? I don't think we need to wait for.
Yeah, sounds pretty good. We got a good turnout.
Okay. So quickly, what's going to happen in next 30 plus minutes? Like the last 5 minutes, that was also a planned intro for waiting for others to join and a bit of chit chat. Now I will walk you through the features of Crawlee. It will be just a quick introduction of what's possible, and believe me, there is much more to this to describe, but it won't fit into those 15 minutes. So let me quickly invite you right now to check out our documentation at crawlee.dev. There are comprehensive guides and a lot of examples. And then a quick QA session will follow up. We had scheduled it for 10 minutes, but we will see. We can prolong it a bit. Okay, so let's start. What is Crawlee? I guess most of you saw the website and our tagline. So Crawlee is the web scraping and browser automation library. It's an open source project developed by Apify, which is a provider of web scraping platform. It supports crawling both via HTTP requests via Node, as well as browsers through Puppeteer and Playwright. And yeah, that's pretty much what I said. It builds on top of the popular tools. The other ones I would like to mention is Cheerio and JSDOM. Those are the Node.js versions you can use to make some sense of the HTML you could get from the website as a response. It's a library written in JavaScript, or better say TypeScript. It provides first-class support for TypeScript. You don't really need to use TypeScript to benefit from it, because you will all get the IntelliSense from your favorite IDE. It's written for Node.js. It requires Node.js 16+. That's because we find many issues with HTTP2 support in older versions. So we just decided to bump the minimal version right ahead. And as we were discussing in the last few minutes, it originated from the Apify SDK version 2. The Apify SDK still lives, and its version 3 is basically like the Apify related tooling. We will quickly discuss that in the end of the presentation. Okay, so crawl the way you want. Crawlee provides several classes you can use, or several implementations for crawlers you can use. And it provides a common API for those approaches, so you can quickly switch between them. We have Cheerio crawler, JSDOM crawler for crawling fastly through Node.js requests, and Playwright and Puppeteer crawler for the sites where you need to do some user-like behavior, and like, for example, going through infinite scrolling and logging into websites and stuff like that. On the screen here, we have a code snippet, and this is like the bare bones example of how you can use Crawlee. Here we see the Cheerio crawler variant, and we just create new instance of it, and the only required part is the request handler. We will quickly talk about it in a moment. And then we feed it with an initial request and start the crawl. And this example like this, it's a complete example you could run right now, and it would do a recursive crawl of our documentation. We'll quickly go through the details in a moment. I said that it provides common API, and this is a proof of it. This example, you maybe didn't even saw it, but this is another example. This is a Playwright example, and you can see that it's pretty much the same. The only difference here is how you handle the page inside, how you handle the request. With Cheerio, we have the $sign, and we use that to get or to extract the title here, for example, and then save it to the data store. With Playwright, we use the page object, and with slightly different API, we get the same value. Now, Crawlee provides ready-to-use templates. This means that we can really easily start our project, and we have all those different types of crawlers here, and we have all of them into variants for TypeScript and JavaScript. Those templates provides out-of-box TypeScript setup. That means that you really don't need to think about anything. It will provide you with the development experience where you don't need to build the project. It also provides the optimized Docker files. And for TypeScript, it also includes the multi-stage builds. This means that we will our final image will contain only the compiled JavaScript and only the production dependencies of the TypeScript itself. Crawlee also handles proxy management and sessions. Now, what that means, we can easily create a proxy configuration and pass it in. Someone is not muted. Whatever. And we can pass it to the crawler, and this is it. The crawler will automatically rotate through our proxy IPs or the proxy URLs we provide. And there is obviously much more control over this. We can even implement our own proxy configuration that that will dynamically fetch and assign the proxy URLs in any logic that we would like to see. The proxy URLs are by default tied to sessions, and we use the sessions to mimic the user behaviors and to filter invalid proxies. So this way, if a request that is tied to a particular proxy URL fails too many times, we retire that session and we won't try again. And over time, this should lead to a pool of usable sessions that are that will allow us to get to the response. When we were mentioning, when we saw the example before, the request handler, we have this one parameter. This is called the crawling context, and it has a lot of interesting properties we can use. It provides a common interface. Those properties or objects will be there for all the types of crawlers. That's, for example, the request, some proxy info, session info, or even a reference to the crawler itself. Then there are some common helpers like the enqueueLinks here. We will talk about it in a moment. And then we can have some crawler-specific methods like the jQuery $sign or the page handle from Puppeteer and Playwright. Alternative approach to this request handler is using a router, which offers us a way to have multiple request handlers that will be executed based on the request label. This means that we can pair the request that we enqueue with a label, basically a string of our own choice. And based on those labels, we can have separate handlers that will be doing different stuff for different use cases. You can imagine this as crawling an eShop, and we will want to handle categories differently than the product detail pages. On this example, we see the explicit usage of the router when we create the router instance and then pass it to the request handler parameter. This is because the router is like a hybrid object that also serves as a function. Alternatively, we can even use the crawler.router instance, the implicit one. And with that, the simplified example is here. You can see that you can even just create a crawler instance without any parameters and then just set up the routes and run the crawler. And lastly, I would like to mention that the router also supports middlewares via the router.use. This is quite a common pattern you can know from Express. And you can have many middlewares for a single route. They will be executed in the order you define. So you could, for example, use the middlewares to adjust how the request will be processed and even label it. Now a bit more information about the enqueueLinks. As I mentioned, it's a context helper, and it allows you to crawl the sites recursively. And yeah, here we have an example how you can use it. You can adjust the selectors, which will be used to filter the links. And for example, here you see that we can also label those requests directly. So this will be handy with the router approach. There are various ways to filter the links that we will be enqueuing this way. One of them is the selector that I just talked about. The other is the enqueuing strategies. We have 3 of them. One is to enqueue the whole domain. This means any subdomain as well. One is the host name. This means that you will crawl anything recursively on the exact same host name, including the subdomain. And then we have pattern matching via globs and regex, as well as there is a filter method. I'm not 100% sure how exactly is it called, something like transform request function, which you can use to have absolute control, where you have basically a callback that allows you to do anything with the request options before they will get enqueued. And yeah, lastly, I would like to mention that there are same defaults. The same hostname strategy I was just referring to, this is exactly the default. So if you just do enqueueLinks without any parameters, it will do exactly the recursive crawl of the site as the first bullet point mentions. Now, other context helper that might be quite handy is parseWithCheerio. As I mentioned, there are differences between the crawler types, and this is like the main difference, that with Cheerio, you have the Cheerio handler that you can use to extract data from the HTML. And with the browser crawlers, you need to use the page handle. And with parseWithCheerio, we can easily obtain the jQuery handle even in the browser crawlers. This will allow to process the data pretty much the same way, regardless of the crawler type. Now a bit of words about saving data. Crawlee has a concept of storages. The default implementation stores the data during runtime in the memory, and it then parses them to JSON file. This is both for observability as well as for configurability. We can even let the crawler reuse the state that was saved, but that's not like the default behavior. Yeah, and the Crawlee also provides a common interface for those storages, so you can even plug your own. We currently have 3 different types of storages. One is tied to the Apify platform, one is this so-called memory storage, and there is another one that is based on SQLite database. Yeah, and there are basically 2 types of data or the storages you can use. The key value store, which is basically a map of keys mapped to values, and the dataset, which is basically an array of whatever you want to store there. Mainly, it will be an object. Now, how we can run the crawler in the cloud. As I mentioned several times already, we have the templates, and the templates provide the ready-to-use Docker files. We also provide ready-to-use base images for those Docker files that you can use. And they have Crawlee pre-installed as well as the browsers pre-installed. So they should be really easy to use and quite fast, as they are quite optimized. And talking of the cloud, the best way how you can run Crawlee will be definitely the Apify platform. I would say it's Crawlee native, because you can really achieve the same as locally on the Apify platform with three easy steps. You just install the Apify SDK, you wrap your code in actor.init and the actor.exit. Those two basically handle the mapping of the storages that Crawlee uses to the Apify platform related products. And this basically means that instead of storing stuff into memory or into JSON files, you will be able to see them on the platform. And yeah, then we use the Apify CLI to quickly initialize and push the project to the cloud. And yeah, this is all from me. So yeah, I think I even managed to fill the 15 minutes just fine, which is almost impossible. And yeah, so I would like to invite you to join the Slido. There is the Crawlee code, and feel free to ask the questions.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, the top voted one is, could AI be added to Crawlee to analyze a site structure?
That's a good question. You know, like the yes/no question. The answer is of course yes. Anything could be done this way, and like the follow-up would be how. And I would say this is the future. Like we have a small AI team in the company as well. We also did some tests with analyzing websites through various scrapes, and yeah, it's not there, and I believe it's gonna be there. It just takes time to find the right approaches. But
yeah, sorry, coming. Yeah, like a few years ago, I think some people thought AI will do everything, and it seems obvious that it should, but it's, if you need 100% reliable data and you have like a template, you have like a website with a standard structure, then you will use like CSS selectors, or you will use like handwritten scraping, because the AI is never 100% reliable. But if you need only like 80% reliability, it might be, or 90%, it might be good enough. And we are actually working on some project right now. I cannot tell you all the specifics, but what you can do with Crawlee, for example, is if you have like for example, a Python script that's running some AI model, you can run it, for example, as a separate process, and you can have Crawlee instead of calling some extraction function with Cheerio or jQuery, you can run the basic crawler or the HTTP crawler to get the HTML, and then call the Python script from JavaScript, via process call, and get the parsed results from there. It's actually pretty simple to do. I would just like reduce the concurrency, because the Python script could be heavy and could overload the CPU or memory. But actually, this type of configuration, I think, will be more and more common in the future. And in some projects, we are actually using Python, for example, also for some AI to recognize images on CAPTCHAs and stuff like that. So you can even combine it with different language. While like process call on the Apify platform, you can call an actor.
Okay, I guess let's go to the next question. Like we could spend hours talking about this, and I guess like we two are not the best people in the world to discuss the AI. For me, it's just a bunch of if-else statements. So okay, so Matt, which one we will go with?
We have a question from Tom asking, are there any specific settings for Cheerio crawler if doing a broad crawl of 20,000 URLs or more?
Maybe I would let Lukasz answer this one as well.
I would say you use just the request list instead of request queue. since now you don't even need to define that that class, you can just use the crawler.addRequests or just like paste the array into the crawler.run, and you can you shouldn't need to configure anything. Basically, like 20K is not that much actually. Like we have been using Crawlee to do tens of millions. At that point, it might be just scrolling too long, so you might want to split it into several processes, you know, maybe running on different computers, different servers. But yeah, 10 to 20K or 10K, it's totally fine to just use the default configuration. You can maybe limit the max concurrency if the website is not able to handle a big load. That's the only thing I would say. And have like a proxy pool.
Yeah, that's probably like the only requirement, to be sane and not bombard the website, because you could do that easily with Cheerio. Okay, I guess we also answered the other question about crawling 100,000 pages.
Yeah, it was a similar question. Also, does the router allow you to feed links into it real time, like add to the queue real time?
Yes, of course. Like you can do anything. You can do all the same things in the router handlers as you can do in the request handlers. You can process the requests as well as enqueue new ones. That's the whole point of, or yeah, it's just an abstraction about the request handler. So yes.
Yeah, you have the access to the crawler, to crawler itself, and in the request handler context, and via that you can add requests. So you can always add new requests dynamically. That's the main functionality of the crawler, actually.
Okay, cool. And looks like we got another question. Do you still have to configure Puppeteer with the normal settings from the Puppeteer API, or is some of that stuff handled under the hood?
Not sure what that means. Like for me, the answer would be no, because we don't really need to configure Puppeteer anything with anything special, right?
Yeah, some people I saw in some projects, they like to use all the different kind of argument options when launching the browser, and we think, you know, some of it is just like a grandma's advice. Someone thinks it helps, but it doesn't really do anything. But you know, feel free to try. We use the reasonable defaults. One thing you can use is the block images, which we also have a utility function for that in Crawlee. So that's pretty common to block like images, CSS, and stuff like that to reduce the traffic. So that's the common option. Otherwise, you might like change the viewport, but you can do all of these things in code in the handler or in the pre-navigation hooks. You don't need to necessarily like configure the whole browser.
Yeah, I guess the answer is you can do anything you want. We are extensible, but it shouldn't be needed.
Awesome. And a simple one, can you disable the request retries?
Yes, of course. You can, I believe you can even like set how many retries we want on a request.
Yeah, you can do it on the crawler level with max request retries property, or you can even set on the request itself, you can set the no retry property to true. And if you just throw error or like let it run to completion, it will never retry.
Yeah, we even provide one specific error type you can throw that won't be retried. So there are options.
All right, cool. And I guess the top-rated question, can Crawlee do test scrapes automatically to figure out how often to scrape a site without being blocked, without using a proxy?
Well, it can do anything that the developer will program it to do, right? Like I believe we even have something like that, right, Lukáš? Like doing quick tests, not like actual crawl.
I think generally, you know, what you want to do is you want to run it with the same configuration you would run it in production. So if you will run it in production with proxies, you want to test with proxies. So you want to have the same configuration. just maybe like limit the number of items. So if your whole crawl is 10,000 products, maybe the test can be just 50, for example, or 100. And what you would do is just look if you really scraped 100 results, and then run some function to look if the values are correct of the products you scrape or whatever you are scraping. On the Apify platform, we have like the testing actors that we attached with a webhook, but you can do it as you want locally.
Cool, awesome. And how do you create a Docker file for Crawlee, Playwright, and Cheerio crawlers?
Well, easiest way, just use the templates from the CLI and it will be there. And if you don't like that, feel free to check out our documentation. We have a Docker guide with examples of how the Docker files should look like. And again, we provide the base images that people can use that will include necessary things and all the dependencies that are needed.
Just one quick question about that, if possible. In terms of the Docker files, I seem to get an issue with it says main.js is not available, it's not found. And that's reason it's because it's TypeScript project, of course. And it's using the default Docker images that you provide. So is there something I'm missing there?
It's hard to understand the exact specifics. So I'd direct you to the GitHub issues. Feel free to open one there, and we'll be happy to help you. But in general, it should work. So most probably you are just using wrong base Docker image or something like that. But if you try to use the templates that the CLI will produce today, they should just work.
Yeah, the Crawlee templates, right? Not the Apify.
Yeah, if you're looking for...
We just recently fixed all of the templates, like 2 days ago, basically, including the Apify CLI ones. I didn't mention this in the presentation, but we have the Apify CLI with the same capability that also generates the templates, and this should be pretty much in line. But again, this happened like 2 days ago, so maybe try if you have the latest.
I will try it.
Yeah, and if it still doesn't work, you can head over to the Discord and ask questions there. You'll get a very fast response. Yep. Good question. Cool. Looks like we have another question from another anonymous user. How does Crawlee itself deal with Cloudflare bot protection or detection? Sorry.
I don't really know. Maybe if you know, Lukasz, a bit about this. But like in general, the bot detection is something that I haven't been dealing with directly myself. So I would have to ask some colleagues.
So there are several things that you want to think of when dealing with bot detection. One is proxies. So if you have bad proxies, or just like if you use it without proxy, if you have bad local IP address, or you have been blocked, there is like nothing you can do, since that's how the internet works. Like the IP address is always visible. So you need to use a proxy server to mimic that you are more users than one. So you need to have a pool large enough, and the proxies need to be of some quality. There are tons of providers, so if you Google something up, it will probably be pretty solid. And it's hard to say how many proxies you need. So it's really hard to say. 100 might be enough to scrape, I don't know, 10,000, 100,000 products, but it really differs on each website. It differs massively. Some websites are pretty much non-blocking, and some websites you will not be able to do almost anything without the most expensive proxies, which are the residential proxies. So that's the first part. You need to quality proxy. And the second part is how you kind of behave if the scraping process looks like a human. So in this case, Crawlee actually brings the support, which is the fingerprint suite. So Crawlee is generating headers based on statistics of real users, and it's also for browsers generating like browser data. So those look like real users by statistics. And the session pool that Martin mentions also helps to connect that with the proxies. So basically, we are creating like a kind of imagined users in the session pool, which have a specific IP address, specific headers, and fingerprint. And if they are blocked, they are removed from the pool, and new users are generated. So this is kind of the best approach, and you need to combine all of these things to bypass the most complicated websites. And also the last thing I would mention, it really depends also what you are scraping from the specific website. So there are usually many ways you can do the scrape. You can scrape the HTML. You can do HTTP requests on the specific network calls that are happening on the websites. Those are usually less blocked, like the private APIs. You can use the browser and do some like mouse action there. And some of those things might be blocked more than others. So you also need to play with these. It's complicated.
And another question kind of related, how does Crawlee TLS browser fingerprinting work? Does it work without the headless browser with only static HTTP calls?
I believe like not 100% sure, but I believe we have like different way to handle the HTTP requests. We have the gold scraping library that is doing similar tricks with the fingerprints, but like much more complicated at the same time, because it tries to fingerprint also things like the TLS. But for browser fingerprints, we use the fingerprint suite that works basically on gathering the real world data that we really get from real life users. And then we feed them into an AI model that then generates the fingerprint that are used.
Yeah, one of the things God scraping does is actually it tries to behave like a browser, but it's just HTTP. So it doesn't use the Node.js TLS. It uses the browser ciphers. So that's part of the kind of the HTTP fingerprint. But I don't think it's actually it's rotated with the sessions. I think it's just like several hard-coded values there. I don't think it's rotated with the session, but our expert is unfortunately, our like fingerprint expert, unfortunately not here. So definitely you can file an issue or ask in Discord and we will get back to you.
Cool. And about proxies, does Crawlee find public proxies to add to the proxy queue? And if so, can you choose the location of the proxy? I believe this is more about the Apify SDK.
Well, Crawlee does not. You need to configure it to do things. You are the one who need to provide the set of the proxy URLs. And we also have a dynamic way. So if you know how to obtain the some list dynamically through some public APIs, for example, this is definitely possible to do it. You can implement a function that will be called every time we try to get new proxy. And this way you could do pretty much anything, but no, Crawlee does not do that. You need to develop it.
Matt, you could do a small promo with your free proxy scraper. So Matt has an actor that scrapes a list of free proxies.
Oh,
But otherwise, you can use any provider, as we said.
Yeah, and maybe a follow-up to this about the Apify SDK, that on the Apify platform, we have this much easier because you just create an Apify flavored proxy configuration, and it will use the Apify proxy, a product that we offer that should help a lot with proxy rotation and providing different various types of proxies that you choose on your account.
Cool, awesome. And the last top rated question is, does Cheerio crawler handle single page applications?
Yeah, of course. That's the reason why we still have the browser crawlers, that they are fat and slow, but this is the way how you can work with sites that are rendered by JavaScript. So yeah, we just use either Puppeteer or Playwright scraper or crawler. And the recent addition is the JS DOM crawler. That might be of some use. I haven't tried it yet myself, but the point of using JS DOM is to be able to evaluate a bit of JavaScript as well. So it might help with this use case too.
Yeah, but you can use Cheerio crawler on most of the SPAs. You just need to know where to look for the data. Either it's in the HTML in some scripts. So usually, a lot of times the JavaScript and the JSON data are actually baked in the HTML. So you can just download it and parse it as a text from there. Or you just listen for the network calls and you look, for example, how the products are loaded via network, and you just replicate that. So in most cases, you can use Cheerio crawler. Sometimes it's just too complicated to like reverse engineer the website, and so you might need to use browser, but it's almost always possible. But you need to put a little bit more work into that, or know where to look. So next question, I guess.
Cool. Also, yeah, that's actually the end of our question answering section. So I guess we can move into a bit of an outro.
Well, I have just this one last slide. So yeah, thank you and get in touch. So these are the links that we are talking about in the last 30 minutes, the website, the Discord link, our GitHub repo. We have also a Twitter account for Apify, and of course, Apify.com, the company that provides all this fun.
Yeah, and you can always reach us on Discord if you didn't answer anything. Usually we reply in a few hours, or some people from the community will reply.
Yeah, actually, sorry guys, there was one more really interesting question. It was, what is Crawlee's business model? How do we make money? Because he's currently building a business model on e-commerce and data crawling. Thanks.
Yeah, I believe I answered that already, and that's like, we have the Apify platform that's like the main source of income. So we run a product that you can use Crawlee on and run the scrapes in scale.
Yeah, we built the business and then we open sourced it.
Okay, then I guess we can call it a webinar, or do you have some more to say, Matt?
No, I would say just if you have any more questions, if we didn't answer your questions, I noticed there are a few that are still on Slido. Go ahead and join the Discord community and ask your questions there, and we'll be happy to answer them. Or even members of the community might answer you as well.
Okay, then let me thank you one more time and see you some other time, I guess.
Hope to see you on Discord.